So here we are in Salford with three bright, practical, creative minds, Geoff Mulgan, Rohan SIlva, Josh Valman. And we're here to talk about post-Brexit Britain, the opportunities, the threats. What's your top-of-the-head conclusion about what we need to be doing post-Brexit?
Much of what Britain's got to do post-Brexit is probably the same as what it had to do pre-Brexit, but even more so. So sitting here in Mediacity in Salford, this is a real sort of symbol of what Britain's done well, but also what it's maybe done badly in the last 20 years. Fantastically dynamic industries, creative industries, media, computing and so on, much stronger than anyone might have expected 20 or 30 years ago and symbolised by this place. But not much feed through to opportunities, let alone the pay packets of many of the citizens of a city like this. And one of the reasons the Brexit vote happened was people feeling they were being bypassed. They weren't benefiting from the big changes of globalisation and technology. So we've got to address that, and the UK's got to address its stagnant productivity problem. Again, despite all the digitisation, all the gadgets we have, productivity in the economy has been basically immobile now for many years. Now those would be big challenges in any scenario, but they're much harder because of Brexit, because we will likely see in the next few years tariff barriers for many of our exporters. We'll have big regulatory problems trying to sell into our nearest major market. It will be harder to pull in talent. Britain's done fantastically well in recent years in pulling in best brains from all over the world. That will be harder in the future. Probably harder to pull in inward investment. Again, a great success story of recent years, harder to sustain in the future. My biggest fear is that the brains of government and the brains of so many institutions will be distracted. They'll be all focused on the huge complexities of Brexit, and every minute, hour they spend on that is a minute or hour not spent on dealing with the underlying problems of productivity and opportunity.
Well, I voted Remain. I sort of wish we weren't in this situation and we were planning to stay inside the EU. But I think what entrepreneurs do, and I think what this country does at its best, is all about rolling up our sleeves and saying, well, let's make the most of what's in front of us. And actually, you know, when there are big changes, when the strategic position, the economic position shifts, actually that opens up a lot of opportunity in the policy world in government to think big. Because this isn't a sort of business as usual moment. And, you know, in the days after the Brexit vote, I've called for things like, you know, big infrastructure fund to invest in ultra-fast broadband and high-speed rail to better connect Britain up. Big increases in spending on adult skills. One of the terrible things I think about this country is that, you know, if you lose your job, you know, it might be replaced by technology, you typically have to bear the burden yourself to borrow money to reskill. If you look at what's happened over the last 10 years, we've gone from a country that, you know, had a very small proportion of energy generated from renewable sources to one where that's ticking upwards. And that's a really important shift. There are some great companies out there, British technology companies like Bulb, for example, that are doing their bit to try and disrupt the big six energy companies. And, you know, I think that's a fantastic trend. And, you know, if you look at some big policies, not perfect, quite flawed in lots of ways, like the smart meter policy and rollout. However imperfect, they are opening up opportunities, I think, for big data and open data to transform the way we consume energy and enable small companies to innovate and plug into the grid in new ways. So I think this is I think you're right to identify that as a really exciting domain for the UK. Policymakers often have short attention spans. They politicians like to make announcements. It's very different actually to the world of business, which requires certainty. And I think the big industrial strategies I was involved with in government, things like Tech City, creation of the life science strategy and a follow-up on genomics, these are long-term 10-year projects. And, you know, we did have a lot of, you know, certainty around them. Hopefully that will continue, because if we're going to really have impact in those areas, entrepreneurs, investors need to know what they're doing for a very long time.
When I look at what potentially Brexit looks like in terms of what the UK would do following the next 2, 3, 5 years, I look at places like Singapore, and Singapore is seen as kind of a business hub to operate Asia from. And I wonder whether we can build the same kind of relationships to be that independent but controlling, or seen as controlling authority over Europe. You know, you've got a very diverse culture, maybe not quite as diverse as Asia, but again, you've got diverse languages, diverse operations, and maybe the UK, as it's currently seen, is quite neutral, can remain in that position even without the closer ties to Europe. So the people who are winning at the moment are the people who are using sensors, using technology and software to understand what actually happened, what people actually did with something. Because when you're, I don't know, 8 hours into a 12-hour long-haul flight, and I ask you how you feel, or what you did with that pair of headphones 6 hours ago when you were in the middle of that flight, you have no idea. You'll tell me something sensible. I can tell you it's definitely not what you actually did. And the people who can master that insight and that control of their customer and whoever that may be, those are the people who succeed regardless of what the government or the economy does. You know, I understand, and a lot of people do understand, that actually nobody quite knows what Brexit is yet, and whether that means that it's a slightly different tax code and nothing changes, or whether that means we're totally stepping away from everything that is Europe, we don't know yet. And until you do, it's quite hard to make a true decision.